66 million years ago, a rock approximately 10 kilometers across, traveling at roughly 20 kilometers per second, hit what is now the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico. The energy released was approximately 2 million times greater than the most powerful nuclear weapon ever detonated. The impact excavated a crater over 180 kilometers wide. It triggered earthquakes of a magnitude the modern world has never experienced. It generated tsunamis that reshaped coastlines across the Gulf of Mexico. It sent a wall of superheated debris into the atmosphere that, on re-entry, heated the air globally to temperatures sufficient to ignite wildfires across entire continents. And then the dust settled into the atmosphere and blocked the sun. What followed was years of impact winter, reduced sunlight, collapsed photosynthesis, the systematic unraveling of food chains from the bottom up. Temperatures dropped. Plant life died. Herbivores starved. Carnivores starved shortly after. The event that geologists call the Cretaceous-Paleogene extinction killed approximately 3/4 of all species on Earth, including every non-avian dinosaur that had dominated terrestrial ecosystems for over 160 million years. Tyrannosaurus rex, gone. Triceratops, gone. The entire extraordinary diversity of large dinosaurian life that had ruled every continent on Earth for longer than the human mind can meaningfully contemplate. Eliminated. The most successful large animal lineage in the history of terrestrial vertebrate life, erased within what is, geologically speaking, essentially an instant. And then there's the crocodile, sitting in its river, largely unbothered, continuing to exist with an equanimity that, given the circumstances, borders on audacious. The crocodile not only survived the impact event that eliminated the dinosaurs, it survived with its fundamental body plan essentially intact. Modern crocodilians are recognizably similar to their Cretaceous ancestors. While the world around them was collapsing into one of the worst mass extinctions in Earth's history, crocodilians made it through and continued making it through for another 66 million years, right up to the present moment, where they are currently thriving on every continent except Antarctica and Europe. How? How does an animal survive something that killed 3/4 of everything? And why did crocodiles make it when creatures far more powerful, far more ecologically dominant, far more diverse than anything alive today did not? The first thing to understand is that crocodiles are not primitive survivors who got lucky by being simple. This misconception frustrates paleontologists considerably. The crocodilian body plan looks ancient. It is ancient, but ancient does not mean unsophisticated. Modern crocodiles are the product of over 200 million years of continuous evolutionary refinement, and they are, by any serious biological measure, extraordinarily well-engineered animals whose apparent simplicity conceals remarkable complexity. Crocodilians belong to the broader group Archosauria, the same group that includes dinosaurs and birds. They are therefore more closely related to birds than they are to lizards, despite the superficial resemblance. When you look at a crocodile, you are looking not at a reptile that failed to become a dinosaur, but at a lineage that diverged from the dinosaurian stem early in Archosaurian evolution and took its own path. One that proved, in the very long run, remarkably durable. The ancestors of modern crocodilians were considerably more diverse than their modern descendants. During the Mesozoic era, crocodiliforms occupied an extraordinary range of ecological niches. There were terrestrial crocodilians with legs positioned beneath their bodies rather than splayed to the sides, crocodilians adapted for life in open ocean, crocodilians with teeth adapted for herbivory, crocodilians of enormous size, and crocodilians of modest dimensions. The group experimented extensively with body plans and ecological strategies across their evolutionary history. What survived the end Cretaceous extinction were the semi-aquatic forms, the lineage that had adopted the lifestyle we now associate with modern crocodiles. And that lifestyle, it turns out, was almost perfectly positioned to survive exactly the kind of catastrophe that hit 66 million years ago. To understand why the semi-aquatic lifestyle was a survival advantage during an impact winter, you need to think carefully about what an impact winter actually does to different environments. The catastrophic reduction in sunlight hits terrestrial photosynthesis first and hardest. Land plants die rapidly when photosynthesis collapses. The intricate food chains built on terrestrial plant productivity unravel from the bottom up. Plants die, herbivores starve, carnivores lose their prey base. Large terrestrial animals with high metabolic demands and large caloric requirements are particularly vulnerable because they need substantial food intake continuously to sustain themselves. When the food supply collapses, large, warm-blooded, high-metabolism animals face starvation on a timescale of weeks to months. Aquatic environments respond differently, and the differences matter enormously. Aquatic food chains are built substantially on detritus, decaying organic matter that accumulates in sediments and provides an energy base for invertebrate communities that does not depend on ongoing photosynthesis in the way terrestrial food chains do. Freshwater ecosystems in particular contain substantial reserves of organic material in their sediments, and the invertebrate communities feeding on that detritus, insects, worms, mollusks, crustaceans, can persist through periods of photosynthetic collapse on stored organic matter for extended periods. A semi-aquatic predator sitting at the interface of aquatic and terrestrial environments, capable of exploiting both, has access to whatever is surviving in both domains. When terrestrial prey disappears, the aquatic invertebrates, fish, and other aquatic organisms remain. When those are depleted, whatever terrestrial carrion is accumulating near water sources is available. The semi-aquatic position is a flexibility position, and flexibility is exactly what survival in a catastrophic extinction event requires. The metabolic architecture of crocodilians is one of the most important factors in their survival, and it is here that the contrast with non-avian dinosaurs becomes most stark. Crocodiles are ectothermic. Their body temperature tracks environmental temperature rather than being internally regulated. This means they do not burn calories maintaining a constant internal temperature. The metabolic rate of a crocodile at rest is approximately 1/20th of what you would expect from a mammal of equivalent body weight. A large crocodile can survive for extraordinarily long periods without food. Documented cases of crocodilians surviving over a year without eating exist in the scientific literature, and the theoretical maximum fasting duration for large crocodilians under suitable temperature conditions may extend considerably beyond that. This metabolic thriftiness is not simply an absence of capability. It is an active physiological strategy. Crocodilians can drastically reduce their metabolic rate during periods of food scarcity, entering a state of metabolic depression that extends their survival window dramatically. They do not need to eat frequently. They do not need to maintain body temperature through food energy. When food is scarce, they slow down, reduce activity, and wait. Now consider the non-avian dinosaurs. The evidence for dinosaurian metabolism has accumulated substantially over the past few decades, and while the picture remains somewhat nuanced, the dominant current view is that most non-avian dinosaurs were endothermic, or at least mesothermic, generating substantial internal heat with metabolic rates considerably higher than modern ectotherms. The consequence of elevated metabolism is elevated caloric demand. Large, warm-blooded animals cannot simply stop eating and wait. They need continuous caloric input to maintain their physiology, and when that input stops, as it did when impact winter collapsed terrestrial food chains, they run out of options much faster. The metabolic contrast between crocodilians and non-avian dinosaurs maps almost perfectly onto the contrast between survival and extinction. Low metabolism, low caloric demand, ability to survive extended fasting. Survival. High metabolism, high caloric demand, dependence on continuous food supply. Extinction. The crocodile's apparent sluggishness. The quality that makes it seem primitive and unsophisticated compared to the dynamic, active dinosaurs was precisely the quality that kept it alive when the food ran out. There is another crucial survival factor that rarely receives adequate attention: body size at the time of the extinction event. The crocodilians that survived the end Cretaceous extinction were not the enormous forms. The giant crocodilians of the Cretaceous, Dinosaurs, which reached lengths potentially exceeding 10 meters, and may have preyed on dinosaurs, did not survive. What made it through were medium to large crocodilians in size ranges similar to modern species, with the body mass profile that optimizes the ratio of metabolic demand to fasting survival capacity. Extremely large animals face a particular problem during food scarcity. Their absolute caloric requirements are enormous, even if their weight-specific metabolic rate is relatively low. An animal the size of Dinosaurs needed vast quantities of food to sustain itself. When prey disappeared, even its relatively... By the way, if you want to go even deeper into the secret lives of ancient humans, I just launched a full course called The Secret Lives of Ancient Humans. 10 modules, 3+ hours of content covering everything we never talk about on YouTube. What they feared, how they communicated, what hunted them, and much more. Plus an exclusive PDF guide included. Link in the description. See you inside. Low metabolic rate couldn't compensate for the absolute scale of its caloric need. The giant crocodilians went extinct alongside the non-avian dinosaurs. The survivors were in size ranges that balanced two competing advantages: large enough to have meaningful energy reserves stored as body fat, but not so large that absolute caloric requirements were unmanageable during extended fasting. This size optimization, which the surviving crocodilian lineages happened to occupy, represents another example of how the extinction event selected for particular biological profiles rather than simply eliminating life randomly. The same size dynamic explains why small mammals survived much better than large ones. The tiny mammals of the Cretaceous, mostly small, nocturnal, insectivorous creatures, had low absolute caloric requirements and could survive on whatever invertebrates and seeds persisted through the impact winter. Their small size was not a limitation, but an advantage in exactly the way the moderate size of surviving crocodilians was an advantage. The ecological position of semi-aquatic crocodilians also conferred a thermal buffering advantage that deserves consideration. Water has a much higher thermal mass than air. It absorbs and releases heat more slowly, maintaining more stable temperatures across seasonal and short-term fluctuations. During the temperature drops associated with impact winter, aquatic environments would have cooled more slowly than terrestrial ones, providing a buffer that extended the period during which aquatic ectotherms could remain functional. Additionally, crocodilians already possessed behavioral adaptations for managing temperature: basking to warm up, retreating to water or shade to cool down, adjusting activity levels seasonally. These behaviors, refined over millions of years of ectothermic existence, transferred directly to survival strategies during a period of abnormal temperature fluctuation. A crocodilian experiencing reduced temperatures from impact winter would reduce its activity, reduce its metabolic rate further, and wait. Behaviors it was already well equipped to perform. Burrowing behavior documented in some crocodilian species provides additional insulation options. Crocodilians can excavate burrows that provide thermal stability and humidity regardless of surface conditions. This behavioral flexibility meant that surviving the acute phase of impact winter was a matter of finding the right microenvironment and reducing metabolic demands, a challenge well within the existing behavioral repertoire of semi-aquatic ectotherms. The freshwater ecosystem angle deserves particular emphasis because it appears to be central to the survival pattern visible across the end Cretaceous extinction. When researchers examine the pattern of survival and extinction at the end Cretaceous boundary across different ecological categories, a striking pattern emerges. Freshwater ecosystems were dramatically less affected than marine and terrestrial ones. Not unaffected, freshwater ecosystems experienced significant disruption, but substantially more of their diversity survived. Freshwater turtles, crocodilians, freshwater fish, and freshwater invertebrates made it through at much higher rates than their terrestrial and marine counterparts. The reason is almost certainly the detrital energy subsidy described earlier. Freshwater ecosystems receive continuous input of organic matter from terrestrial sources: leaves, woody debris, dead animals, decaying plant material washing in from surrounding land. This accumulated organic matter in sediments provides an energy base that persists through periods of photosynthetic collapse in ways that marine pelagic food chains, dependent on phytoplankton that require sunlight, cannot maintain. The freshwater refuge hypothesis for crocodilian survival is therefore not just about the crocodilians themselves, but about the ecosystem context they inhabited. They were embedded in the food web most resistant to impact winter disruption, exploiting the energy resources most likely to persist through the catastrophe. Their survival was partly about their own biology and partly about the resilience of the ecosystem they were part of. This ecosystem-level perspective matters for understanding not just the end Cretaceous event, but crocodilian survival through the broader sweep of Earth history. Crocodilians have survived multiple mass extinction events, the end Cretaceous being the most dramatic, but not the only one. Their persistent association with freshwater environments has placed them repeatedly in ecosystems that are relatively buffered against global disruptions, providing a consistency of refuge that has contributed to their extraordinary longevity as a lineage. The post-extinction world also favored crocodilians in ways that extended beyond mere survival through the acute phase. The aftermath of the end Cretaceous extinction was a world with drastically reduced large animal diversity. The ecological roles previously occupied by diverse dinosaurian predators were suddenly vacant. For crocodilians, this meant reduced competition and reduced predation pressure from the apex predators that had previously shared and contested their ecological space. The recovery of crocodilian diversity in the Paleocene, the period immediately following the extinction, shows explosive diversification as surviving lineages radiated into newly available ecological space. The Paleocene and Eocene periods produced a remarkable diversity of crocodilians exploiting opportunities that the extinction had created. Larger forms reappeared as prey species recovered, and food chains rebuilt. Terrestrial forms reemerged in some lineages. The surviving crocodilian stem diversified substantially before eventually contracting to the modern fauna of 23 to 25 species occupying the semi-aquatic tropical and subtropical niches we associate with crocodilians today. This post-extinction radiation demonstrates that crocodilian survival was not purely passive, not simply a matter of holding on through catastrophe. The lineage was biologically capable of exploiting the recovery phase, diversifying aggressively when ecological opportunity appeared, and producing a diverse and successful fauna in the post-extinction world. Survival through the catastrophe was the prerequisite. The subsequent radiation was the evidence of active biological fitness rather than mere endurance. Modern crocodilians display a suite of biological features that, examined together, read as a masterclass in evolutionary optimization for exactly the ecological niche they occupy. And many of these features contribute directly to the durability that has characterized their lineage. The immune system of crocodilians is extraordinarily potent. Crocodiles live in warm, bacteria-rich freshwater environments and regularly sustain injuries from intraspecific combat. Territorial disputes and mating contests involve physical conflict that produces wounds. Despite this, crocodile wound infection rates are remarkably low, and crocodilian blood serum has been found to have antibacterial properties against a wide range of bacterial species, including antibiotic-resistant strains. Researchers studying crocodilian immune function have identified novel antimicrobial peptides with potential pharmaceutical applications. The crocodile's immune system is so effective that it has attracted serious medical research interest. The circulatory system of crocodilians is unique among reptiles. They possess a four-chambered heart, a feature otherwise found among vertebrates only in birds and mammals. This allows complete separation of oxygenated and deoxygenated blood and supports the elevated cardiovascular demands of their active predatory lifestyle. Additionally, crocodilians have a specialized shunt mechanism, the foramen of Panizza and the cogtooth valve, that allows controlled mixing of oxygenated and deoxygenated blood during diving, enabling prolonged submergence by managing oxygen distribution to tissues with remarkable efficiency. Their sensory systems are considerably more sophisticated than their appearance suggests. The small dome-shaped structures covering the crocodile's jaw and body, integumentary sensory organs, are mechanoreceptors and possibly chemoreceptors of extraordinary sensitivity, capable of detecting pressure waves, vibrations, and possibly chemical gradients in water with precision that allows them to detect the presence, size, and direction of objects in complete darkness. A crocodile floating with its body submerged in murky water at night is not hunting blind. It is receiving detailed sensory information about its environment through a distributed sensory array covering its entire body surface. Their jaw mechanics produce bite forces among the highest recorded for any living animal, with large saltwater crocodiles generating forces exceeding 16,000 newtons. But the muscles opening the jaw are paradoxically weak, which is why the traditional method of restraining a crocodile involves holding its mouth shut rather than prying it open. The engineering trade-off, tremendous closing force, minimal opening force, reflects a predator that secures prey through grip and never needs to open its mouth against resistance. The evolutionary history of the crocodilian lineage extends further back than most people realize, and its depth illuminates the accumulated resilience that has enabled repeated survival through planetary-scale disruptions. The Archosaurian lineage that gave rise to crocodilians diverged from the Dinosaurian lineage approximately 240 to 250 million years ago, during the Triassic period. This divergence occurred in the aftermath of the end Permian mass extinction, the largest extinction event in Earth's history, which eliminated approximately 90 to 96% of all species on Earth. The crocodilian lineage, in other words, emerged from and survived one mass extinction event before going on to survive several others, culminating in the end Cretaceous event 66 million years ago. This deep evolutionary history matters because it represents not just a single lucky survival, but a pattern. A lineage that has repeatedly demonstrated the capacity to navigate catastrophic disruption and persist, diversify, and continue. The biological features that enabled this repeated survival are not accidental. They have been tested against planetary-scale disasters multiple times and have passed each test. The crocodile is not a survivor of one extinction event, but of many, a lineage with evolutionary resilience encoded across hundreds of millions of years of continuous experience with catastrophe. The Triassic period, from which crocodilians emerged, was itself a period of significant ecological disruption. The recovery phase following the end, Permian extinction, was complex and extended, and early Archosaurians navigated an unstable ecological landscape characterized by rapid environmental change. The semi-aquatic ecological position, low metabolic demands, dietary flexibility, and freshwater habitat association that would later enable end Cretaceous survival were already being refined during this earlier period of environmental challenge. The question of why crocodiles survived where dinosaurs didn't also invites consideration of what dinosaurs actually means in this context, because the answer contains a complication that reframes the question somewhat. Birds are dinosaurs. This is not metaphor or loose analogy. Birds are theropod dinosaurs, more closely related to Velociraptor than Velociraptor was to Triceratops. The avian lineage represents the surviving branch of dinosaurian diversity, and there are approximately 10,000 species of living dinosaurs on Earth today. More species of living dinosaur than living mammal species. From this perspective, the question is not why dinosaurs went extinct while crocodiles survived, but why non-avian dinosaurs went extinct while avian dinosaurs and crocodilians both survived. The answer to this refined question points toward the same convergent features. Early birds were small, very small in many cases, with low absolute caloric requirements. They were capable of dietary flexibility, many exploiting seeds, insects, and other resources that persisted through the impact winter. Their elevated metabolism, which would seem to be a disadvantage during food. Scarcity was offset by their tiny body size, keeping absolute caloric needs manageable. Their mobility allowed them to track surviving food resources across distances that terrestrial non-avian dinosaurs could not cover. The pattern of end Cretaceous survival, viewed across all vertebrate groups, shows a consistent theme: small body size, dietary flexibility, access to detrital or otherwise buffered food chains, and either low absolute metabolic demands or extreme mobility enabling food tracking. Crocodilians satisfied the first, third, and fourth criteria through their biology and ecology. Birds satisfied the second and fifth criteria through different biological solutions. Both made it. The large metabolically demanding, terrestrially dependent non-avian dinosaurs satisfied none of the criteria and did not. The irony embedded in the crocodile's survival is worth appreciating fully. Here is an animal that has been described repeatedly and across popular culture as primitive, a living fossil, a relic of an ancient world, an evolutionary dead end that somehow stumbled into the present through sheer inertia. The implication is that the crocodile persists not because of any particular excellence, but despite its limitations. The actual picture is the opposite. The crocodile persists because of specific biological excellence, excellence at exactly the things that matter for long-term survival across planetary scale disruptions. Low metabolic demands, extreme fasting tolerance, semi-aquatic positioning in freshwater ecosystems buffered against global catastrophes, dietary flexibility, powerful immune systems, sophisticated sensory capabilities, deep ecological knowledge encoded in behavioral repertoires refined over hundreds of millions of years. The crocodile is not a primitive animal that failed to evolve into something better. It is a highly refined animal that arrived at an optimal solution and had no evolutionary pressure to deviate from it, because the solution kept working. The 66-million-year-old body plan is 66 million years old because 66 million years of survival pressure failed to find a reason to change it. That is not failure. That is validation. The dinosaurs were, in many ways, the more spectacular life forms. Larger, more diverse, more ecologically dominant, more dramatic in the imagination. And they are gone. Not because they were poorly designed, but because the catastrophe that hit them was outside the parameters their biology could handle. The crocodile's biology happened to encompass exactly those parameters, not because it was luckier, but because the particular combination of features it had accumulated across its evolutionary history aligned almost perfectly with the survival requirements of the worst day in the history of life on Earth. 66 million years ago, a rock hit the planet, and the world ended. And somewhere in a river, a crocodile felt the temperature drop slightly, slid a little deeper into the water, and waited. It had been waiting through catastrophes for longer than the dinosaurs had existed. It would keep waiting. It's still waiting. In approximately 91 rivers, lakes, estuaries, and wetlands across the tropical and subtropical world, the same basic body plan that survived the end of the Cretaceous is doing exactly what it has always done: floating, watching, conserving energy, and demonstrating, with the patience of something that has outlasted nearly everything else on Earth, that the best survival strategy is not the most spectacular one. It is the one that works.